Now, Motorola usually does a bang-up job with its smartphone camera tech, and this here fresh new Motorola One Hyper certainly offers some intriguing optics. For one, the Hyper's primary lens around back is a mighty 64 megapixel affair, which can actually capture photos at that maximum resolution, or else ease back to 16 megapixel images with a spot of pixel binning. And that is backed by a secondary 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle lens, which can capture a 180 degree view of the world on demand. But that's not all, because the Motorola One Hyper is also the very first Moto phone to sport a pop-up selfie camera, giving you a notch-free full view display. It's a 32 megapixel front-facing camera, so you can expect those selfies to pack quite a lot of detail. Definitely time to slap on a bit of blusher. So those specs certainly seem pretty special, but is the Motorola One Hyper's camera tech actually up to snuff? Well, I've been using it as my full-time shooter for a few days now, and here's my full Motorola One Hyper camera review. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now, the One Hyper uses the standard Motorola camera app, which is packed with toggles and nifty features, but still pretty easy to get your head around. Now, by default, the Motorola One Hyper actually captures images at 16 megapixel resolution rather than that full fat 64 meg effort. And that's because it uses pixel binning in order to brighten up your images without introducing any noise. More on that in a bit. At that 16 megapixel level, you can of course still expect to see plenty of finer details in your pics, especially when a scene is naturally lit. And at any point, if you want to grab a super high-res photo, you can swap to the 64 megapixel dedicated mode. This is definitely a sound idea when you need to crop it into your shot while keeping things crisp, especially with the absence of a dedicated telephoto lens. The jump in detail level over the standard auto mode is absolutely nuts. Either way though, you can expect realistic hues in each of your pics, which means that naturally vibrant subjects really shine. Shots taken inside, however, can come across a little bit soft, while any kind of motion often results in blur. So you'll definitely want to make sure that both yourself and your subjects are stood as still as possible while you hit that shutter button. And high contrast is no friend to the Motorola One Hyper either. Those HDR smarts do a reasonable job of preventing oversaturation to keep your photos from appearing whitewashed or anything, but it is often at the expense of detail, especially the color reproduction in those darker areas. The likes of Google's Pixel 3a and various Huawei smartphones definitely perform better in that department around this price point. In low light though, the Motorola One Hyper does a bang-up job. Even in auto mode, you get a pretty respectable photo, helped along no doubt by that pixel binning tech, which combines the data from 4 pixels into one. All the same though, slap on the dedicated night mode and those results definitely improve. The overall brightness isn't boosted much at all, but you will notice much finer detail creeping in at times, while those light spots are cleaned up to reduce flaring. The result is a moody, attractive finish, whatever you're trying to shoot. And Motorola's rather excellent portrait mode is also in fine fettle here on the One Hyper. I love how you have full control of the depth effect with pretty accurate edge detection as well. Even the studio effects and other filters churn out some pretty damn good results, worthy of a proper flagship blower. And don't forget that you've got that ultra-wide angle lens as well, which you can swap to with just a quick tap of this icon down here. This delivers a sweeping 180 degree view of whatever you're shooting, definitely ideal for your touristy escapades where you're trying your best to capture something flippin' huge like this here castle or this unsurprisingly large cathedral. It's a pretty common camera feature these days, even on budget blowers around the £200 to £250 price point, so I'm definitely glad that Motorola didn't skimp. And thankfully the overall results are still impressive, with similar colour output to the primary lens, and even night shots come out pretty well. And you've got the usual smart AI branded features on board the Motorola One Hyper as well, found in quite a lot of the other Motorola One smartphones too. So for the likes of the smile shutter function, which seems to work pretty well, and the likes of a scene recognition tool as well, which can suggest alternative shooting modes dependent on the current conditions. So now on to video capture, and the Motorola One Hyper does a decent job here. You can shoot standard Full HD footage or boost that resolution to full fat 4K for gorgeously detailed results when viewing back on a big telly. At that Ultra HD level, you have a choice of 19.5:9 aspect ratio if you want a proper bit of widescreen action, and I've got to say I am impressed by the image stabilisation even at that 4K resolution. It's as smooth as butter as you'd expect from full-on flagships like the Galaxy S10 or the iPhone 11. Occasionally things can look a wee bit dark and moody, but that's it as far as my complaints go, while the audio pickup is also pretty dependable. Your commentary and everything else happening around you is captured cleanly. Sadly though, there is no action video mode here on the One Hyper, unlike the cheaper Motorola One Action, which is kind of named for that, which allows you to shoot standard landscape video while clutching the phone just normally, which is absolutely brilliant if you're an outdoor enthusiast type, want to shoot while sprinting, jogging, climbing, cycling, things like that. And so onto that spring up selfie cam, which thrusts its way out of the Hyper's head on demand. It's a 32 megapixel shooter as mentioned, so you can definitely grab some sharp looking snaps of your mug, although by default it captures at 8 megapixels. Still perfectly fine for your social medias and such forth. But I highly recommend knocking off that infernal beauty mode which comes on by default, unless you really want to look like an airbrushed mannequin thing. When shooting indoors the results are again quite soft, but outdoors you will get some slick looking detailed pics, and yes, the full selection of portrait mode options are available if you want something a little bit extra. And with that front-facing camera, you can shoot up to full HD resolution video. Again, the HDR Smarts occasionally struggle a little bit if you are shooting against a particularly bright backdrop, but on the whole, not too bad at all, and the audio pickup, as you can hear, absolutely fine. So there you have it, my in-depth Motorola One Hyper camera review after a few days of testing. As you can see, not quite an infallible mid-range snapper, but definitely packing some clever tech, and it'll basically do whatever you want it to do. So are you tempted by the Motorola One Hyper? Well, my full review should be coming about a day or so after this camera review goes live, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to subscribe and ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a lovely week, people. Cheers, love you!